For one brief, glittering moment, this was the richest family in the history of the United States. They built palaces that made European royalty look modest. They threw parties that cost more than most Americans earned in a lifetime. And then, in 1973, around 120 of their descendants gathered for a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. The fortune that took one ruthless old man a lifetime to build, his heirs managed to burn through in just a few generations. This is the rise and fall of the Vanderbilts. It began with a boy who had almost nothing. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born poor on Staten Island, barely educated, and by all accounts, barely civil. At 16, he bought a single boat to ferry passengers across the harbor. He undercut every rival, crushed every competitor, and built a steamship empire so dominant, they called him the Commodore. Then, already an old man, he did it again in railroads. He seized control of the lines into New York, built Grand Central, and assembled the mighty New York Central. By the time he died, in 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt was worth around $105 million, the richest man in America. By some accounts, he held more money than the United States Treasury itself. He knew exactly what wealth could do to weak men. So he did something almost unheard of. He left almost the entire fortune to just one son, and warned that dividing it would destroy it. He was utterly without mercy. When two associates once tried to cheat him while his back was turned, he sent them a single, now famous line: "I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I'll ruin you." And he did exactly that.
Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it.
He was right to worry. He just couldn't see how right. His son, William Henry, was supposed to be the dull one. Instead, in just 8 years, he nearly doubled the fortune to around $200 million. For a moment, he was the richest man on earth. But William Henry's children were born into a world their grandfather never imagined. A world where the money was simply always there. And they began to spend. They built palaces on Fifth Avenue, mansions like Chateau. In Newport, summer cottages of marble and gold with 70 rooms. And in the mountains of North Carolina, one grandson built Biltmore, 250 rooms, the largest private house in America. It still is. They threw the most extravagant parties the country had ever seen. One ball alone cost a fortune, thrown simply to force their way into high society. They even traded the money for titles. In 1895, Consuelo Vanderbilt was pushed by her mother into marrying an English duke. A fortune handed across the ocean to buy a crown's worth of prestige. The bride wept on her wedding day. They were American royalty. They had everything money could buy, and almost none of them ever asked what would happen when the spending outran the building. The most formidable of them all was Alva, who married into the family and set out to conquer New York society itself. The old aristocracy, led by the Astors, had snubbed the Vanderbilts as crude new money. So, in 1883, Alva threw a costume ball so staggeringly extravagant that the Queen of Society was forced, at last, to acknowledge them. The Vanderbilts had bought their way to the very top. Their yachts were floating palaces. Their art collections rivaled museums. They kept hundreds of servants and dozens of homes, and they competed with one another over who could spend the most spectacularly of all. Here is the quiet arithmetic that destroyed them. The Commodore built. William Henry built a little more, and every generation after them only spent. The palaces that announced their glory became anchors. A single Fifth Avenue mansion could cost a fortune a year just to staff and heat. Multiply that across dozens of homes, generation after generation. And the fortune kept being split among more children, more heirs, each taking a slice, none replacing what they took. Meanwhile, the source of it all, the railroads, was slipping. The age of the rail baron was ending, and the family had built no new empire to replace it. Within 30 years of the Commodore's death, not a single Vanderbilt remained among the richest men in America. The greatest fortune in the country was simply evaporating. One by one, the palaces went dark, and the heirs themselves began to come apart. One grandson drank and gambled away his share and died young. His little daughter, Gloria, became the center of a scandalous custody battle, splashed across every front page. The poor little rich girl fought over for a fortune that was already slipping through everyone's fingers. Each generation inherited a smaller piece and spent it faster than the one before. The Commodore had built a fortune by refusing himself every luxury. His descendants destroyed it by never once learning to say no. By 1947, the great Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue had been torn down, their marble and gold auctioned off to pay debts. They called it the fall of the House of Vanderbilt. In 1970, the railroad the Commodore had built went bankrupt, the largest corporate collapse in American history to that point. The engine of the whole fortune was gone. And in 1973, when around 120 of his descendants gathered, it is said not one of them was a millionaire. Generations later, one famous descendant, the journalist Anderson Cooper, would shrug it off, saying there was no trust fund and that he never expected to inherit a dime. The money was simply gone. It took one hard, ruthless old man a lifetime to build the greatest fortune in America. It took his heirs a lifetime to spend it into nothing. They had everything money could buy, and they bought their way to having nothing at all. I'm telling these stories of empires built and burned on this channel. If that's your kind of history, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Biltmore, the great house in the mountains, survived only because the family opened its doors to paying tourists to cover the bills. The grandest of all the Vanderbilt palaces became, in the end, a museum of a wealth the family itself could no longer afford.